What's up, guys? Welcome back to Tidal Gardens. So if you're new here, Tidal Gardens is a coral farm located in Copley, Ohio, and this is now the 10th episode of our new building update. We've been constructing this new facility of ours now for about 2 years. It's kind of taken a while, but we finally have water moving through our first set of tanks. If you're interested in checking out the initial progress of this building and want to go back in the Wayback Machine, I'll leave a link to a playlist that kind of covers the entire process. I also invite you to join the Tidal Gardens community by hitting the subscribe button as well as the notification bell. And you can keep up with all of our updates on this new building. Now, having said that, normally most of the content on this channel is more coral specific and coral focused. However, this topic is by far the most popular whenever I poll the community for what they'd like to see. Whenever we do these video polls, almost invariably, this topic comes bubbling up to the top ahead of all the other stuff. So let's get right into it. The biggest deal is that we've now got all of our water running in here. And it was definitely an odyssey to get all the plumbing done, which we'll kind of cover in this video, because there's a lot of individual components that go into kind of what took a while. And also I'd like to cover design-wise what we've got going on and what our thought process was. So let's start by talking about this overflow here. It took a little while because the original design called for this removable weir, and unfortunately, the tank didn't come that way, so it had to be fabricated after the fact, and then I had to get that installed. But it's working really nicely. It's very important to be able to remove this occasionally to service all this, because invariably a whole bunch of stuff starts growing on this weir. Things like algae mainly, but we've got some of these teeth in the weir that have corals, like Postilopora, growing and blocking it. So being able to periodically remove them and get them cleaned up, it's kind of an important maintenance thing. Also, there are 3 drains in a bean animal overflow pattern. The one that's down here you can't see because we don't have a standpipe coming up, but that's the main one. It's controlled by a Spears gate valve. The middle one is the one that sets the level of the overflow box. The last one theoretically should never be used. It's the everything's gone wrong. This is the emergency overflow. I want to call your attention real quick to this middle overflow. Now there's a bunch of different designs that can be used for this. So I just have it wide open, and the idea is just to allow a small trickle in there. Again, it sets the height inside the overflow box, but it also does a little bit of surface skimming, so the main part of the aquarium here gets its surface skimming done by the teeth of the weir. But inside the overflow, I don't want a whole bunch of gunk collecting at the surface of the water there either, so it flows in through there. Now, there are other designs, because you can hear a little bit of a slight gurgle, and that can be almost completely eliminated by a couple of different assemblies where you could 90 that over and 90 it back down, put in an airline, and that does quite a bit to silence that particular overflow, but it doesn't quite provide the surface skimming. For now, I'm going with this orientation. As I mentioned before, that main drain line is controlled by the Spears gate valve, and I love these things. So Spears, I believe, is a US company, and they're known for making some really high quality plumbing parts. They're quite an indulgence, but it's one of those things that you really kind of want to get right, because you'll have to constantly be messing with this to dial in the height of the water in the overflow. From this vantage point, you can see how the 3 drains operate. This is the main drain, the one that's controlled by the Spears gate. This one is the one that sets the height of the water in the overflow, and this is the emergency. Now, all 3 of these overflow drains come down and into the single 3-inch plumbing assembly that you see there, and make their way back to the sump. What is kind of cool about the way that this is arranged is that the main drain, where 99.9% of the water is going through, comes down and enters the 3-inch assembly at the water level that's slightly lower than the water level that's in the sump. So all of this part is underwater, and that serves to greatly quiet down this drainage process. You can slightly hear a little bit of movement through this pipe, but barely any. The only time that this ever really made kind of a gurgling noise was when the water level of the sump got a little bit low from evaporation and it went below the level of this pipe. This is another one of the drainage assemblies. It starts really with this clean out. I want to be able to eventually run a snake through this pipe if necessary, because what ends up happening is you get a whole bunch of vermeted snails and all kinds of creepy crawlies that block it up over time. A 3-inch pipe allows a ton of flow to go through, but I don't want it to be a situation down the road where I have to start cutting out pipe to service it. So this clean out will definitely help in that regard. There is a tool that kind of looks like a chain, and you send that down the pipe and it's attached to a drill, and it just kind of just beats up all the little creepy crawlies, and all of that just gets flushed into the sump, and you can collect that into some kind of filtration. Now, taking a look at this triple drain assembly, this is for one aquarium, and this is for the aquarium next to it. Let's go ahead and follow where this 3-inch drain goes. Comes over here under the tank. It's held together by unistruts, held in place by unistruts, I should say, to keep it off the ground so you can clean underneath it. And this is kind of a cool little element. Do you see how it slightly curves and elevates? And you can see it on the other drain, how it kind of just gently and elegantly jogs over. That's done by a hot box. The plumber can put this pipe into this green oven, and it basically makes this into like a noodle that can be manipulated for about, let's say, 10 minutes. You could theoretically run 45s, but now you're talking about additional fittings, and a 3-inch Schedule 80 45 is wholesale, I think, $17.50. So that's saving, I don't know, almost $40 just to do a little quick jog over like that. And this is going to be way cleaner than that. This third drain that is all the way on the right will go to the show tank. This is an incomplete drain right now. Currently it's plugged. And if we follow this, it comes all the way over here. And you can see the unistrut on the wall where it will be strapped in. It's going to have to come over here, and we're going to hotbox it around our radiant heating coils there. Strap back into the unistrut. Hotbox around some of this plumbing for the utility sink. Again, using this bracing. And finally make it all the way over to our show tank. One thing that people were a little bit worried about was how the return lines enter the sump underwater. There's a lot of sump designs that kind of insist on the plumbing coming up and over the side, which does make sense. I mean, having an air brake is nice, but you can see how it works just fine. All you need to have is the sump water level lower than the tank water level, and it will drain down in here. Now, we currently have some filter socks on there just to collect the plastic shavings and whatnot. But I don't know, maybe we should just leave the plastic shavings to replicate the ocean. This line here comes from the return line. And the future plan for this is to be able to install a utility manifold. If you can imagine a whole bunch of, again, Spears gate valves, by far my favorite. A whole bunch of these gate valves here. So this is a 1-inch, and we have some 3/4, and we have some 1/2-inch ones as well. And I'm thinking about having a total of 6. Now, currently we can only envision about 4 devices that we'd like to plumb off of this utility manifold, but it's much better to have a couple extra than to not have enough and then having to use another pump, for example, or to get real goofy and then teeing off this sort of thing. We don't want that. So once we have 6 of these guys all plumbed in, it'll extend this all the way to this edge, and that'll be nice for stabilization. So it'll be stabilized by unistrut here and stabilized by resting on this bracing here in the sump. One of the devices that will be running off of that is this reef octopus skimmer. We've used reef octopuses in the greenhouse next door, and we're pretty happy with it. And at the price point, it's worked out quite nicely, so I can't see any real reason to not use them. We have the cleaning head as well. We don't have it located on this thing just yet, but that's the idea. So we're probably going to use, I think, one of the 3/4 to provide water to this, and then it has its own pump for making the bubbles. If you guys are wondering who made all this stuff, this is all done by a local place in town called AQUACRYLIC. The owner is Steve Shin, and he has been doing acrylic fabrication for ages. And he has put together this sump for us, and these are equipment shelves. So it's going to be holding like the protein skimmer, it'll hold a calcium reactor, maybe some other control mechanisms, who knows. But these are extra beefy. So he had to double laminate ABS. That's what this material is, it's ABS. And then on the bottom is like an acrylic fin about this big. He was able to climb inside and lay down on this. And I'm going to guess that Steve weighs probably about 150 pounds, 180 in that ballpark. Maybe 180 is a little bit heavy. That's like how much I weigh. But this thing didn't even bow. So I don't think it's going to have any issue holding like a calcium reactor or a protein skimmer of that size. And if we needed more room, there's nothing that says that we couldn't get another one of these things just to settle on top. And they can be moved and removed for cleaning and whatnot. Lastly, if for some reason the one fin in the middle isn't enough, we can always add a couple more fins. And then for sure, nothing is going to be making these things bow. And that was kind of a worry of ours because they are 48 inches across. So it's quite a span that could result in a bow if you put something really heavy right in the middle. But again, we don't want to put equipment right in the middle of something like this because then it's a kind of a maintenance hassle. Everything that needs to be maintained is going to be towards the edges of that sump. Next up, what do we have here? So there are 2 separate lines for heating and cooling. This set of lines is currently plumbed. Water can flow through them. These are for the heating system. You'll see that these continue down and circle around in there and come back. The furnace upstairs that heats the floor, all the tanks in the greenhouse, and it will heat all the sumps that are going to be in this building. So there's a total of 4 of these assemblies. So this is the heating coil. These 2 that aren't currently active are the cooling coils. This is a closed loop geothermal that goes into our cistern, loops run in there, and then comes back. The cistern stays at about 55 degrees year round. So come summertime when we need to cool down the systems, they will have this available for cooling. These 2 things are from our water system. So on demand, we have salt water and fresh water to fill up this sump. So if we do like a water change, we can top it off with salt water. If we're just topping off for evaporation, we have our fresh water. If we need to adjust the salinity, you can go kind of like back and forth and figure out exactly which mix you need. Down here is where we have our pump for the closed loop. Now each of these tanks has 2 closed loops. Originally, I was worried that the bulkheads down here are in the bottom of the tank. So if there is a leak, theoretically, it could completely drain the aquarium. Then I got to thinking, theoretically, true, it could drain the entire tank. How likely is that? Very unlikely. because there are tons of people that use bulkheads on the sides of their tanks, on the bottoms of your overflows, and it's not really so much of a leaking issue, right? But the idea that, oh, well, it could be in your entire tank volume, that's really where the stress comes. There's a difference in pressure, but these things don't even have to be that tight to form a seal. So once we had them installed, I was thinking, okay, well, what if there's like a pinhole leak or something like that? It's really not that difficult to get back in there and to tighten it down. The other thing is, what is the likelihood of a pinhole type leak starting and draining this entire thing out? I can't even imagine a situation where that would occur. It would take 6 months to drain this thing out with a pinhole leak. I mean, imagine how long it would take a slightest little trickle to drain out 300 gallons. And the entire time, assuming it's salt water, right, it'll start to kind of get calcify on itself the entire time. It's not happening. Just tighten it back up. You're fine. Now, I am very happy with how quiet these Vectra pumps are. And in general, the pumps that we're using are super quiet. I'll show you the Abyss later. But these Vectra L2s, this is running at 100%. I can barely even hear it. It's barely vibrating. So like really, really good job there. Now, when it comes to controlling this, I wanted to do our best in hiding the controls and all the wire management that we're going to have to do. So this is kind of what we came up with. We came up with this mount where we mount the two controllers for the two closed loop pumps, and we mount them on the underside here. Because we have these little fittings that can, like hardware mounts that can slide in. You attach them with M8 screws. And in the back, we've got some cable management. And if we ever had like a warranty issue, these things don't come out very easily once they're mounted here, and the serial numbers are on the back of these. So we went ahead and label printed the serial numbers there. Once these guys are situated roughly like that, it's out of this plane, so you're not likely to bump up against it or anything like that. It's really easy to get to for all the different controls. Yeah, and more or less the wires are out of the way. We're going to have to J-channel some stuff underneath here, but that's basically it. So once we just fabricate a couple more of these and get our wire management, and I'm actually waiting for Amazon to send me some power cables. So other than that, I think we're going to be good. This was the bottom side of the closed loop. The output of the closed loop is this guy. We're just testing this out right now. It's kind of like this little octopus assembly. I guess it's a quadrupus assembly. And we just have some lock line fittings that kind of come in close to the water level and seeing how that does for flow generation. It's pretty impressive so far. The intake is over there. We're going to be getting a basket strainer, and you see the intake line there to the pump, and output goes to our little quadrupus. This assembly is completely flexible. So if you wanted just to like simplify it and just put in like a low 90, that can just be unscrewed right there, and you can swap out to whatever type of flow directional thing you like, because all the real work is done down here. Now in the last video, episode 9, there were a lot of people asking about these 90s. Like, what is up with these 90s? Aren't you just losing a ton of flow through these 90s? You are losing flow through these 90s. That is absolutely true. But what you gain from having these 90s, I think, greatly compensates for that small lack of flow. And it's not even so much of a lack of flow, because you're talking about a pretty hefty pump, and you're going through a 90, a valve, and then you're in the tank. And that's like 3 feet of head. It's practically nothing. Now, what this does give you in terms of flexibility is wonderful, because if you unscrew this union right there, unscrew the union at the pump, it gives you a lot of play. Whereas if you just had it pumped straight up into the tank, you don't have nearly that type of flexibility. The other thing is, you see this pipe heading over and then up and in. Well, the pump, back down here, this pump would not line up nicely. If we had plumbed the suction side straight, it doesn't line up. It doesn't line up straight. So either way, there is going to be some plumbing necessary. Otherwise, this length would be at an odd angle in relation to the rest of the stand. And yes, I am that nutty when it comes to having stuff look straight. Okay, please excuse the snake pit of wiring. We still need to do some wire management, but this is that Abyss 400 return pump that powers our manifold. So that's what's sending the water back into the tank. This thing is, so far, hyper impressive. We're currently running this guy at, I believe, 65%, and it's providing all the flow that we need to these 4 tanks. And once we get the big show tank at the end, we'll probably only have to crank it to about 75%. What I learned was that just to get it into the sump there, it was really pumping it great at about 15%. But to then get it into our tanks, it took about 45% to get it to these first 2 tanks. We hadn't plumbed the second 2 tanks in yet, right? So I was kind of worried, it's like, man, am I gonna have enough flow? Because this took already, 45, 50%. And how is this gonna work to then also provide flow to these guys, right? But it turned out to be nothing at all, because the difference between 45% and providing this kind of flow to these tanks was like another 10. And then so we got it to 55%, looked great, dial it up to 65, and that's where we're at currently. Before I forget, this piece of rock in here was a gift from one of our attendees at the Tidal Gardens barbecue. I think his name is Basley. I can't remember exactly how to pronounce that, but I'll put his name up there. And if I can dig up his business card, his company that makes this kind of custom rock, is very nice of him to bring over. I'm gonna have to do a lot of thought onto how I plan to aquascape this type of stuff. Again, this is a frag system, so it's not quite so much in the way of aquascaping, but there's gonna be plenty of opportunities to do aquascaping in the larger show tanks once they arrive. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this update, the 10th update, no less, and finally we've got some water circling through these systems. Next step is to get this all cycled. Jacob from FRITZ Industries, he a long time ago brought us like a gallon of their turbo start, and I've never really used like the bacterial starter cultures before, but it was very kind of FRITZ to give us a bottle of that. So once we get salt water running through the system, which might be as early as tomorrow, we're going to drain out all this RO water and start to get that salt water cycled. So quick thank you to FRITZ, thank you to Basley, and thanks to Steve over at Aquacrylic for doing all this great work over here. Again, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you guys next time. Take care. Happy reefing.